Hello everybody, and welcome to this string of bullshit that I have been convinced to end up doing. I need to get closer to the mic because I'm an idiot. This was a dumb idea. Oh, and by the way, happy April Fools. Don't worry, you're safe here. There's not gonna be a fake or like dumb video or anything like that. Instead, I actually feel like doing a practical joke because this is not my idea. This was suggested by somebody in the community who I can't remember who it was. I think it was CB. It might have been somebody else. Regardless, there's this meme that I saw a long time ago that just keeps cracking me up, which is just watching a planet being ripped apart by an asteroid and saying this will drastically affect the trout population. So it kind of spawned the idea of what 40k events would drastically affect the trout population. Oh my god. And yes, I know I haven't uploaded in a little bit. That's because life has been annoying, and you know, let's just do something dumb for a change. This is probably going to be on the shorter side of videos, just to at least keep, I don't know, just keep me in check. I don't even know if this is going to be edited, frankly. But as you can see, we do have 5 categories of affecting the trout population. The first is zero trout effect, which means that literally nothing, no matter how bad it seems, none of this touches the trout population. Local trout impact, which is, you know, maybe some trout are dead, maybe their migration patterns get fucked up. Do trout migrate? Trout migrate, right? I'm pretty sure they migrate. Significant trout decline, literally hundreds, if not thousands of trout have died. Trout catastrophe, we are now in, like, the endangered zone of the trout population. And, of course, this will drastically affect the trout population, which is world-ending events, as per the meme. And the first thing we're going to go ahead and start with, and I do have some of these events in order. They go in order of when they've occurred in 40k, and then we have some miscellaneous events towards the end, just because some people have suggested them. And a majority of these were suggested by members, so if you're wondering, hey, why isn't X or Y here? That's because nobody suggested it. If you would like to suggest ideas or concepts for videos, I usually put out a weekly at everybody in a specific channel in the Discord. If you're a member, please go ahead and hop in there. And no, you don't have to remain as a member to stay in the Discord. That's never been a rule. Just, you know, follow the rules and you don't get banned. That's about it. But the first thing we're going to go ahead and talk about is the first one over here, which is the War in Heaven. Now, I have to go ahead and just tab over here. Let's go ahead and look at what the War in Heaven specifically is about. For anybody who doesn't know, which if you're in 40k and you don't know what the War in Heaven is at this point, please seek help. The War in Heaven was it's the most ancient, most devastating conflict that ever happened in the history of Warhammer 40k. Happened 45 or 60 million years ago between the Necron tier, who then become the Necrons, with their Catan against the Old Ones and their allies, including the Eldar, the Krork, I think the Jaqueros, like the monkey or orangutan people, were invented at this time. They were. And a bunch of other races that I don't care to know enough about. So, it's funny because on the Lexicanon page for it itself, because it has the casualties, it has the commanders and stuff listed. Or for the Necrons, it just says massive casualties, and for the Old Ones, it says massive and extinction of the Old Ones. Let's just go ahead and look up a scientific fact real quick. The Earth was formed 4.54 billion years ago. Life on Earth didn't occur until 3.5 to 3.7 billion years ago. Trout were created around 30 million years ago, roughly, according to most scientific research or archaeological research. What's it called when you dig up fossils? It's not called fossil research. It's part of archaeology, right? Pretty sure it's part of archaeology. So, because this conflict preludes the existence of the trout by 300 million or 330 million years, my bad, this has zero effect on the trout population. The War in Heaven, the conflict that literally ripped the entire galaxy apart, destroyed the entirety of the afterlife, and destroyed the Old Ones and made the Necrons into what they are today, had zero effect on the trout population. This is the standard for how this entire video is going to go. I'm so sorry. The birth of Slaanesh is the next big thing. So for anybody who doesn't know, the Eldar ended up getting so depraved and so fucked up that they ended up basically murdering and procreating a new Chaos God into existence. The reason why this is so significant and so detrimental to 40k is because, well, first off, humanity was around when Slaanesh was created, which Slaanesh was born around the end of the 30th millennia. This is around the time when humanity was past the Dark Age of technology, which means that this should actually be before here, but I just messed that part up. That's my bad. Which also means that this should be before here, I think, but I also might be incorrect. There we go. But the birth of Slaanesh was devastating because one, humanity was actually around to be able to witness it. It ended up causing just, I believe, severe warp storms. I might be wrong because I keep getting parts of Slaanesh's birth wrong, but I believe after Slaanesh was born, there was warp storms all across the entire galaxy that fucked up humanity. Because at this point, we're past the Dark Age of technology, so most of humanity has spread to other planets. Now, that being said, Trout, as of our current time, are only discoverable on Earth. Trout have been noted as being like one of the most adaptable and I think just like resilient fish of all time. But regardless, trout are able to survive in cooler waters more than most fish. I think they're able to survive falling out of waterfalls or something stupid like that. Trout are like some of the like hardiest normal fish outside of like those like armored catfish that I think are in like Florida or something. They would probably be able to survive on different planets, assuming that they were terraformed enough to the point where it's at least like somewhat comparable towards Earth and it's not like acid rains or something. So because of how resilient the trout is, I think honestly the birth of Slaanesh maybe has like a minor impact on the trout population. I say this solely because I say this solely because in my opinion, trout are like just kind of like fine on their own. I don't really think they need much human intervention. I legitimately had to like do a little bit of research on trout before I made this video. So between doing research on the Raven Guard and then this trout video, I'm literally just like wasting time. This is so fucking stupid. But yeah, birth of Slaanesh, trillions of Eldar dead. Not that much effect on the trout population, suffice to say. Next up is the Dark Age of technology. The Dark Age of technology is sadly this weird point in 40k where I need to like look at my mic. But the Dark Age of technology, or I think it's sometimes referred to as Old Night, is yeah, here we go. The period is from M15 to M25. It's only 10 millennia. Oh, only 10 millennia. It's a period of 40k where humanity was kind of just like traveling across the galaxy, and you know there were some problems here and there. Like I think the Men of Iron started showing up, and Psychers started to appear around the galaxy, but this was still the point where humanity was at its peak. I think Navigators started spawning around at this time too, which that ended up helping people travel across the galaxy. It's more of a, I think towards the end, not the end, towards the start of the 20th millennia, yeah, here we go, was basically humanity's golden age for around 3 millennia. Despite the fact that there was a bit of a catastrophic events going on here and there, I do think that the Dark Age of technology, for the most part, had little to no effect on the trout population. That being said, the Men of Iron show up at some point. Yeah, the Men of Iron were created during the Dark Age of technology, which, I mean, I already knew, but... So yeah, towards the end of the Dark Age of technology, the Men of Iron started to put belt to ass. So I'll just go ahead and say, because it's still in the era of the Dark Age of technology, we'll go ahead and say that because the wars were fought on human planets, that the Men of Iron themselves specifically had a significant impact on the trout population declining. Next up is the Martian Civil War, and we're just going to go ahead and lump all the Martian Civil Wars in together. For anybody who doesn't know, Mars had several civil wars. This was a theme with Mars, to the point where the first one, Mars was terraformed into basically a garden world and ended up getting saturated by rad bombardments so badly that it reverted back to its old shitty state. This happened around 4 times. Another one was during the Horus Heresy. And this is gonna sound a bit crazy, but after the first Martian Civil War, there was basically no trout population on Mars. So for the first one, it would have been drastically affects the trout population. But after the subsequent Martian Civil Wars, I think I'm in the right in saying that there have been 0 trout population effect. But because of the first one, we'll go ahead and say that there may have been some trout existing on Mars at the time, and because it would have wiped out the entire trout population after the first Civil War, we'll go ahead and say that it was a trout catastrophe. Because while the rest of the preceding Civil Wars had 0 effect on any trout population, that's because there was no trout population to exist to begin with. Next up is the Unification Wars. I don't think we have statistics for the Unification Wars. Could be wrong. Oh no, here's some statistics. The Unification Wars obviously had Big E, Malcador, some of the Custodes, Space Marines that ended up being created towards the end because they killed the Thunder Warriors, but overall it was a majority just heavy Thunder Warrior casualties, and of course the empire slash whatever the techno-barbarians of humanity ended up getting brought to heel. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, where is it? Somebody in my Discord ended up bringing me to this little factoid. They didn't specify who it was, but there was that one lady during the Unification Wars, and I can believe that this ended up happening because I've seen maps of what Terra looked like post-Unification. Someone just drained the oceans, or like destroyed them, which my understanding is that there was nuclear weapons that ended up getting used that ended up basically boiling whatever remained of the oceans around Earth, which at that point there was like basically nothing. So because all water was destroyed off of Earth at that point, I will go ahead and say that the Unification Wars had a drastic effect on the Trout population because there's literally no water for them to live in. So it's a wrap for them. Past that, we have the Great Crusade, which is Biggie and everybody going off and conquering the galaxy and making sure that humanity actually, has its empire back together. There's not really much to say about this. I'll just go ahead and say that this had like little to no effect on the Trout population because I don't have anything here that says positive effect on the Trout population. For all I know, the Imperium went off, conquered galaxies, and reintroduced Trout to local populations. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but regardless, the Great Crusade itself had no effect on the Trout population because the Great Crusade wasn't on Earth. And also at this point, I think all the Trout are dead, so everything here is like null and void. Then we have the Horus Heresy. Just the Horus Heresy. At this point, it's going to become a theme. Zero effect on the Trout population. The Horus Heresy didn't start on Earth. That being said, because of the Great Crusade's work possibly introducing Trout back to other planets, and the Horus Heresy going on and destroying several planets, we'll just go ahead and say because of just the galaxy-consuming conflict, that perhaps the Horus Heresy had a significant decline on the Trout population. Trout are resilient, but getting virus bombed and shot with heavy bolters is kind of enough to kill most things that are organic. Then we have the Dropside Massacre. Let me just go ahead and look something up, because the Dropside Massacre took place on Istvan 5. Istvan 5 itself is described as what kind of a classification of the planet? It's not even classified as a planet, it's just... I mean, first off, it looks like a really shitty planet. I don't think anything lives on Istvan. I might be wrong, but because the entirety of the Dropside Massacre, the horrendous event that claimed the lives of many Iron Hands, Salamanders, Raven Guard, and of course, other members of the Traitor Space Marine Legions, that I believe ended with the surface of the planet getting, not necessarily exterminatus, but it ended up getting saturated by bombardments. This has had zero effect on the Trout population. The conflict that ended up killing Ferrus Manus and wounding several Primarchs literally did nothing to Trout because there's no Trout on Istvan. I'm literally struggling to like find if there's bodies of water on Istvan. I don't think there are, but I could be wrong. Simultaneously, the burning of Prospero, the most idiotic conflict in probably the entirety of the Horus Heresy, and I'm putting this above just anything involving the Imperium Segmentum, or whatever the fuck it was called. Secundus, Imperium Secundus. It ended with the result of 49,000 combined total casualties of 25,000 Space Wolves killed in combat, 23,000 Imperial soldiers killed, and several Custodians and Sisters of Silence being murdered. And on the traitor side, 90% of the Thousand Sons were demolished, along with, 3,000 of the 5th Fellowship ended up fleeing and defecting, whoever that is, and of course, 30 million civilians and Prospering Spire Guard, because Prospero burned. This is the dumbest conflict in the entirety of the Horus Heresy, and I'll stand by that for the rest of my life. That being said, Prospero, if I remember correctly, let me just go ahead and tab back over to it, was classified as just a normal world. I believe it was I don't think it was an ice world. It could be wrong. Yeah, Prospero is basically just described as like an Egyptian-style planet. It had life on it. It was able to sustain itself, I believe. After, obviously, the Space Wolves showed up, it was declared as a dead world because, the Space Wolves killed 30 million civilians. Good job, Lehman Russ, you fucking piece of shit. But because there was people who were alive on Prospero, and because this was after the Great Crusade era, I am willing to say that because the Space Wolves literally destroyed an entire planet that may or may not have Trout on it, the burning of Prospero drastically affected the Trout population, and I think it's safe to say that that might be the case. That being said, next up is the Siege of Terra. The Siege of Terra is someone that's probably going to be incredibly not surprised by what I'm about to say. The Siege of Terra had no effect on the trout population. That's because there's no oceans on Terra anymore. There's no trout. If trout exist, they exist in other parts of the galaxy at this point. Everybody knows what happened on the Siege of Terra. Emperor got wounded, Sanguinius got killed, Horus got killed, humanity got plunged into 10,000 years of darkness, and we still haven't really recovered from it. Speaking of not recovering, the War of the Beast, I am mentally not recovering from the fact that this entire series exists. The War of the Beast was obviously when what was it? The Beast? Yeah, just the Beast. I almost called him a Krork. The Beast is not a Krork, he's something else. The Beast showed up, threw moons at Terra. I believe there was orc moons. I don't know if he actually threw them at Terra, but orcs invaded the entirety of Terra, and for some reason, Terra is the only planet where orc spores just didn't spread, and there was constantly a problem of orcs across the entire planet for tens of thousands of years. It's also where the Death Watch ended up getting created, and we ended up getting that fucking banger line of "We watch in death." Such a stupid fucking. Anyways, the no trout on Earth. The War of the Beast had zero effect on the trout population. That being said, the Tyranic Wars, I think there's 4 of them. All 4 of them had drastically affected the trout population. The ultramarine sector is literally like 500 worlds or something stupid like that. At least one of these planets had to have had a significant population of trout. And because I believe the actual planet of Tyran, I believe is when the Tyranids were first, not discovered, but rediscovered because of somebody's findings. On the planet of Tyran, the Tyranids literally drank the oceans and obviously take any little bit of biomass that they can. So this meant that any fish population, including trout on any planet, would have just been sucked up by a giant crazy straw. So I think I'm in the right in saying that the Tyranic Wars had a drastic effect on the trout population. Then we have the Wars for Armageddon, which I believe there's also 4 Wars for Armageddon. I know there's 3. I don't remember if there's a 4th. I think we're gearing up for a 4th, actually, next edition. But the Wars for Armageddon, which involve Grey Knights, Steel Legion, Black Templars, Orcs, and at some point Angron. It's a fucking disaster. But have you seen what Armageddon looks like? Yeah, there's no trout on Armageddon. Armageddon itself is classified as a hive and industrial world. There is nothing going on in this place in terms of life outside of whatever they ship onto the planet. Also, I was told that apparently Armageddon, at least in the past, was literally the sole manufacturer of chimeras for the Imperium. That's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. Badab War. So the thing about the Badab War is, we've all seen this picture of Tyberos in front of the Space Marine in what looks just to be like a metropolitan area, which is so weird to see in 40k. That being said, the Badab War, and by extension the Badab Sector, I would argue, let's just go ahead and look at Badab. It was Badab Primaris. Badab Primaris, which had a population of 5.1, nearly 5.2 billion people. It was the homeworld of the Astral Claws, and it just looked like a normal planet, which means that Badab Primaris most likely had oceans. The Badab War, for anybody who doesn't know, was pretty fucking bad. I'm pretty sure an entire planet did end up getting destroyed in the midst of the Badab War. And because the Badab Primaris was actually a populated planet with 5 billion people, and it's not classified as a hive world, I would be willing to say that just on the basis of Badab Primaris being close to the Maelstrom, I would say that the Badab War had a drastic effect on the trout population. The fall of Cadia. We go ahead and not the fall of Kabul, the fall of Cadia. Come on. There is an actual estimate for the casualties of the fall of Cadia, but I could be wrong. Well, it would have been the 13th Black Crusade specifically, not the fall of Cadia. For casualties for the Imperium of Man, Eldar, and the Necrons, massive casualties, at least several trillion. As for the Forces of Chaos, it just says massive casualties. Now, Cadia itself, if you just take a look at a picture of Cadia, of actual Cadia, of not Cadia as it is today, Cadia did have oceans. It did have bodies of water. So, there may have been trout on Cadia. As much as I want to do the joke of Cadia had no trout because Cadia is not planet Earth, it is not a stretch to say that most likely fish would have been introduced to different planets in the Imperium. So I think it is safe to say that if there were fish on Cadia, it is a very high chance that it might have been trout. And because Cadia ended up getting cracked in half, this is literally the meme of this will drastically affect the trout population. Next up is the Indomitus Crusade. I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now, little to no effect on the trout population. Now, why do I say that? I say that because I'm specifically talking about the Indomitus Crusade and not the Plague Wars. I am talking about Robute, Robot Butt Gorilla Man, going out into the Imperium and crusading and trying to help out humanity. Gilman himself is not trying to destroy the Trout population. He is trying to go out and make sure that the Trout population can thrive because he's a numbers guy and this is probably important to him. I think I'm in the right by saying that he probably had no effect on the Trout population, but we'll go ahead and say civilian casualties and ecological disasters probably happened. So, the Indominus Crusade probably had as much effect on any remaining Trout population that was undisturbed as much as the birth of Slaanesh. Then we have the devastation of Baal. Now, I will go ahead and be the first to admit, I am a bit ignorant when it comes to the devastation of Baal. That being said, I know that the fucking Tyranids invaded, and I believe this is part of one of the Tyranic Wars. It is part of the Third Tyranic War, yes. By virtue of that, I think it's safe to say that it was a Trout catastrophe. The Tyranids invading. I don't think Baal has any water. Yeah, it's classified as a death world. It has 2 moons, though, which is pretty cool, I guess, but there's no water on Baal, seemingly. Now, that being said, before the Tyranids ended up coming to Baal, a bunch of planets ended up getting basically, not like literally thrown in the way, but were in the way of the Tyranids coming to invade Baal. So, by virtue of respect for those planets, I think it is safe to say that the devastation of Baal was a Trout catastrophe, because those other planets, which may or may not have had Trout on them, ended up getting slurped up like the rest of the planets in the Tyranic Wars. But it is not as bad as the actual Tyranic Wars, because first off, the Tyranic Wars encompassed all 4 of them. 3, I don't know how many there are. And the Baal system, I don't know how many planets are actually in that area, but it's not as much as the Ultramar system, I know that for a fact. The Octarius War, this is the only other thing, is that I don't remember what Octarius looks like. This was a conflict that involved the Orcs, and the Tyranids ended up fighting each other. I think we'll just go ahead and say that the Octarius War had a drastic effect on the Trout population. I didn't realize how large, if I'm looking over here. Like, it's not that many planets, but it's more than like 2. And 1, 2, 3, 4 planets ended up getting consumed by the Tyranids throughout the course of the Octarius War. At least one of those planets had to have had Trout on it, right? Like, I don't think I'm insane in claiming that. The Tyranids, once again, anytime the Tyranids show up, it's basically just gonna end up here in the top, just will drastically affect the Trout population. That being said, the industrialization of planets on the Imperium, now that we're past actual events in 40k, and we have a very, very, like, weird hamburger-looking setup going on here. The industrialization of planets, because somebody in my Discord, what they ended up saying, here we go. The industrialization of Serenade, which is a planet that Trazyn was on during the events of, I think, Infinite and the Divine. And it's kind of funny. Here, let me just go ahead and read this real quick. My lord, Trazyn looked up at him, surprised he remained. Yes? After my long service, may I ask a question? Trazyn considered. You may. Do you intend to destroy this world? Trazyn dismissed the Foscliffe panel of research notes, folded his hands, and looked at the diminished librarian. That's what you want to know? Yes, it would make my mind easier. Let me put it this way. I was here when this whole island was forest, when waves lapped on what is now Embassy Row, a time before pollutants hazed the air and the monsoon rains came naturally, not via cloud seeding. He paused. So when you ask whether I intend to destroy this world, my question to you is, do you truly need the help? Yeah, I think we can just go ahead and say that any industrialization of any world is a drastic effect on the Trout population. If you've seen what Forge Worlds look like, there's not room for any ecology going on at this point. Next up is Exterminatus. This is self-explanatory. Planet cracking, cyclonic missile torpedoes, virus bombing, setting the atmosphere on fire. Exterminatus literally exists to destroy entire planets. Any Trout remaining on it is just gone at this point. The Blood Ravens, because somebody decided it would be funny to say what would happen if the Blood Ravens tried to take all the Trout. Memes aside, I don't think the Blood Ravens could take every bit of Trout, but I'm also at the argument that the Blood Ravens would not go after Trout because it's not an artifact. That being said, if for some reason they needed to take a tithe of Trout for the purposes of consumption, I would assume that it would be a Trout catastrophe, just due to the fact of the Blood Ravens having their reputation, as much as it is a meme, stealing things from people. I feel like they would at least take a decent amount. Next up is the High Lords of Terra. Somebody ended up bringing up the point of, where is it? I bet there's some Hive Lord that really likes fish and has an aquarium filled with one of every species, or some crazy 40k number of fish. I take this as to mean that there's probably some planetary government. I just used the High Lords as an example, and so did they. I take this as meaning that there's probably some Imperium official who views the trout of the Imperium as their own, so they go ahead and they start just taking them, but not for the purposes of eating them. They probably do end up eating some of the trout, though, but for the purposes of keeping them for themselves, which means that it is, by definition, somewhat of a conservation effort. So I will go ahead and say, unless they're eating tens of millions of trout at once, it's probably just a local trout impact. There's trout missing from other systems, but they are at least being preserved and well taken care of. This next one is Terra. I don't know why I put this in here. I kind of just ran out of spaces. There's no trout on Terra. It's probably a disservice of putting it up here. I would say that there's zero trout effect, because there's zero trout on Terra at this point. Next up is the Tyranic invasion. If you couldn't tell, there's a running theme of what's going on. Yeah, this goes up here. Next up, you probably can't tell what that image is supposed to be. That is because it is the Celestial Orrery. I cannot pronounce this. The Celestial Orrery is it is a device that is located in one of the tomb worlds. I forget which Necron tomb world owns this, but regardless, it's basically a star map that you're able to just touch a star on the star map, and it will actually affect the star and overload it. I don't know if this is still the case to this day in 40k, because I know that this is old lore. That being said, because the Celestial Orrery is affecting stars, and I don't think has any bearing on planets, by itself, it has no effect on the trout population. But we really can't ignore the fact that this thing is able to overload stars, and by doing so, overloading a star is wiping out entire systems. We'll go ahead and say it's having a trout catastrophe right now. It's a trout catastrophe. It's not blowing up the planets by themselves. Some of the planets might end up living, but you know, it's still pretty bad. Last up is the heat death of the universe. Zero effect on the trout population, because by the point of the heat death of the universe, theoretically, if it were to end up happening, all trout would probably just be dead. The entire universe would probably be dead at this point. It's like several billion years into the future. I don't really know if any life would exist at this point. But yeah, that's the ranking. And I've been recording this for God knows how long, and I'm hoping that all this ended up... I recorded this for 36 minutes. I wasted more time doing this than I did making an actual video. And you know what? I hope it was fucking worth it. This is the dumbest thing I've ever done. Yeah, no, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. And I'm gonna go get McDonald's because I'm hungry. Enjoy this image, and enjoy the fact that I wasted probably a day's worth of editing and a day's worth of recording doing this. The Raven Guard video was delayed because of this joke. See you guys next time.